In the spring of 2023, in the city of Omaha, Nebraska, Journee, a 30-year-old school counselor, woke up in the middle of the night gripped by sharp, unrelenting pain in her abdomen. She lived alone in a modest, cozy house on the outskirts of the city, nestled in a quiet neighborhood where the hum of daily life rarely disturbed her routine. Her home, a single-story bungalow with a small porch adorned with potted plants, reflected her orderly and unassuming lifestyle. Journee had always been dedicated to her work at the local high school, where she spent her days guiding students through academic challenges and personal struggles. Her life revolved around her career, her morning jogs along the tree-lined streets, and the occasional coffee with colleagues. Intimate relationships had never been part of her world. She had chosen solitude, finding fulfillment in her independence and professional purpose. The abdominal pain, which began as a dull ache a few days prior, had escalated into something far more severe. At first, Journee dismissed it as a digestive issue or perhaps the result of stress from a particularly busy semester. But as the pain sharpened, radiating through her core and leaving her breathless, she could no longer ignore it. By 2 a.m., unable to sleep or find relief, she gathered her strength, slipped into a pair of sneakers, and drove herself to the emergency room at Omaha General Hospital. The hospital, a sprawling modern facility with bright fluorescent lights and the faint smell of antiseptic, felt alien to her. She rarely visited doctors, priding herself on her good health and self-reliance. In the emergency room, Journee sat on a stiff examination table, clutching her side as a nurse took her vitals. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with a kind but hurried demeanor, asked routine questions about her symptoms. Journee described the pain, sharp, persistent, and unlike anything she had ever experienced. The nurse nodded, jotting notes, and soon a doctor arrived to conduct a more thorough examination. The doctor, a man in his late 40s with a clipped tone, palpated her abdomen and ordered an ultrasound to investigate further. Journee lay still as the cold gel was applied to her skin, the ultrasound technician gliding the probe over her abdomen. The room was silent except for the hum of the machine and the occasional click of the keyboard as the technician recorded images. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor returned, his expression a mix of confusion and certainty. He informed Journee that the ultrasound revealed she was approximately 8 months pregnant. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her mind reeled, unable to process the information. She had never been intimate with anyone, a fact she knew with absolute certainty. Pregnancy was impossible. She shook her head, her voice trembling as she insisted there must be a mistake. The doctor, his brow furrowed, suggested that perhaps she was unaware of her condition or had misunderstood her own experiences. His tone carried a hint of skepticism, as if he believed she was either hiding the truth or suffering from some form of delusion. The nurse, standing nearby, exchanged a glance with the doctor, her eyes betraying a mix of pity and doubt. Journee's protests grew more adamant, but the medical staff remained unconvinced. They offered to run additional tests, but their demeanor suggested they viewed her claims with suspicion. Overwhelmed and humiliated, Journee felt a wave of isolation wash over her. The sterile hospital room, with its white walls and beeping monitors, seemed to close in around her. She was discharged with a referral to an obstetrician and a pamphlet on prenatal care, but no answers to the questions swirling in her mind. How could she be pregnant? What had happened to her body without her knowledge? The drive home was a blur, the city lights streaking past her as her thoughts spiraled. Back in her quiet house, Journee sat on her couch, staring at the ultrasound images the hospital had given her. The grainy black and white pictures showed the unmistakable outline of a fetus, a tiny form curled within her. She traced the image with her finger, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and disbelief. The pain in her abdomen had subsided slightly, but a new kind of ache settled in her chest, a heavy, suffocating uncertainty. She thought of her life, so carefully constructed, now thrown into chaos by a revelation she could not comprehend. Sleep eluded her that night as she lay in bed, the silence of her home broken only by the distant sound of a neighbor's dog barking. Doubts gnawed at her, and the fear of the unknown loomed large, casting a shadow over everything she thought she knew about herself. Journee refused to accept the hospital's diagnosis. The notion of pregnancy was not just improbable, it was impossible. Her mind churned with alternative explanations, a medical error, perhaps a misread ultrasound, or even a rare condition mimicking pregnancy. She spent the days following her hospital visit in a haze of disbelief, her thoughts racing as she sat in her quiet living room, the ultrasound images still tucked away in a drawer she couldn't bear to open. Determined to find clarity, she scheduled an appointment at a different clinic across Omaha, a smaller facility known for its thorough diagnostics. She drove there early one morning, the spring air cool against her skin as she gripped the steering wheel, her resolve hardened by the need for answers. At the new clinic, a modern building with glass windows and a bustling waiting room, Journee underwent another round of tests. The staff, professional but detached, performed a second ultrasound and blood work. When the results came back, the doctor, a woman with a calm demeanor and wire-rimmed glasses, confirmed the original diagnosis. Journee was undeniably 8 months pregnant. The doctor showed her the ultrasound screen, pointing out the fetus's heartbeat and fully formed limbs. Journee stared at the monitor, her breath catching in her throat, but she shook her head, insisting there had to be a mistake. The doctor, though sympathetic, offered no alternative explanation, suggesting only that Journee follow up with an obstetrician to prepare for delivery. Defeated but unyielding, Journee left the clinic with a sinking feeling, the weight of the truth pressing against her disbelief. Back at the high school where she worked, Journee's physical changes became harder to conceal. Her usually slim frame had rounded noticeably, and her tailored blouses no longer fit comfortably. Colleagues began to notice, their glances lingering during staff meetings or in the break room. Whispers followed her in the hallways, subtle but unmistakable. Some assumed she had been hiding a relationship, while others speculated about her personal life with a mix of curiosity and judgment. Journee, once a confident presence in the school, felt exposed, her privacy unraveling under their scrutiny. She avoided the staff lounge, choosing instead to eat lunch alone in her office, where she could escape the unspoken questions in her co-workers' eyes. Her closest friend, Tyree, a physical education teacher at the same school, sensed her distress. He had known Journee for years, their friendship forged through shared lunches and late-night grading sessions. Tyree, with his easygoing nature and quick smile, had always been a source of comfort, but even he struggled to understand her situation. When Journee confided in him about the diagnosis, explaining her certainty that pregnancy was impossible, Tyree listened quietly. His face betrayed a flicker of doubt, though he tried to mask it with encouragement. He suggested she might have overlooked some detail of her medical history, or that stress could be clouding her memory. His hesitation stung, deepening Journee's sense of isolation. She began to question whether anyone would believe her, or if she was somehow mistaken about her own life. Late one evening, as she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by papers and half-empty coffee mugs, Journee's thoughts drifted to a memory from the previous year. About 9 months earlier, she had participated in an experimental program at a private clinic in downtown Omaha. The clinic, a sleek facility with polished floors and modern decor, had advertised a study on reproductive health, promising to help women with hormonal imbalances. Journee, who had occasionally struggled with irregular cycles, signed up, hoping to address her minor health concerns. The doctors had described the procedure as a cutting-edge trial involving hormone stimulation to support egg cell development, but the details were vague, buried in technical jargon. She recalled signing a lengthy consent form, skimming through pages of fine print without fully understanding the implications. At the time, she trusted the professionals and thought little of it, grateful for the free treatment. Now, the memory took on a new significance. Journee rummaged through a filing cabinet in her home office, her hands trembling as she searched for any documentation from the clinic. After an hour, she found a thin folder labeled Omaha Reproductive Health Study. Inside was the consent form, along with a few informational pamphlets. The language was dense, filled with terms like ovarian stimulation and experimental protocols, but offered no clear explanation of what had been done to her. A chilling thought took root. What if the procedure was connected to her impossible pregnancy? she resolved to investigate further, determined to uncover the truth behind the clinic's study. As she sat in the dim light of her home, the folder open before her, Journee felt a mix of dread and determination, knowing that the answers she sought might unravel everything she thought she knew about her body and her choices. Journee pored over the contents of the folder from the Omaha Reproductive Health Study, her eyes scanning the dense contract she had signed nearly a year ago. The document, filled with complex medical terminology and vague references to experimental protocols, offered little clarity. Terms like ovarian stimulation and investigational procedures were buried in paragraphs of legal jargon, leaving her with more questions than answers. As she read, a growing unease settled in her chest. The clinic's assurances that the procedure was routine now seemed hollow, and she began to suspect that she had been misled about the true nature of the study. The possibility that her inexplicable pregnancy was linked to the clinic's actions gnawed at her, fueling a determination to confront those responsible. She decided to visit the clinic in person, hoping to extract answers from the staff who had overseen her participation. The following morning, Journee drove to the clinic, a sleek, modern building in downtown Omaha with floor-to-ceiling windows and a minimalist facade. The lobby was pristine, with polished marble floors and a receptionist who greeted her with a practiced smile. Journee requested a meeting with Dr. Paulson, the lead specialist who had overseen her treatment during the study. After a brief wait, she was ushered into his office, a spacious room lined with medical journals and framed certifications. Dr. Paulson, a man in his early 50s with neatly combed hair and a calm demeanor, rose from his desk to greet her. His polite smile did little to mask the faint tension in his posture as Journee explained her situation, describing the hospital's diagnosis and her certainty that pregnancy was impossible. She demanded to know what had been done to her during the study. Dr. Paulson maintained a composed expression, assuring Journee that the procedure she underwent was a standard hormone stimulation trial designed to enhance egg cell development. He insisted that it could not have resulted in pregnancy, citing the clinic's rigorous protocols and ethical standards. His answers, however, were carefully worded, laced with technical terms that seemed designed to deflect rather than clarify. Journee noticed his hands fidgeting slightly as he spoke, a subtle sign that deepened her suspicion. When she pressed him for specifics about the procedure and the consent form's vague language, he grew evasive, suggesting she consult the clinic's legal team if she had concerns. Frustrated by his refusal to provide clear answers, Journee left the office, her resolve hardening. She knew she couldn't trust the clinic's assurances and needed to dig deeper. Back at home, Journee contacted a private investigator named Marcus, a former police officer recommended by a colleague. She met him at a small coffee shop on the edge of Omaha, where she handed over the folder from the clinic and explained her situation. Marcus, a meticulous man with a no-nonsense demeanor, agreed to investigate the clinic's operations. Over the next week, he combed through public records, interviewed former employees, and accessed restricted databases. His findings sent a chill through Journee when he reported back. The clinic had been conducting unsanctioned experiments in artificial insemination using donor material without explicit patient consent. The study Journee participated in was part of a broader, ethically questionable program aimed at advancing reproductive technology, often bypassing regulatory oversight. Marcus uncovered evidence that the clinic had manipulated consent forms to obscure the true nature of their procedures, exploiting participants like Journee, who trusted their expertise. The revelation hit Journee like a tidal wave. Her pregnancy, which had seemed like an impossible anomaly, now appeared to be the result of deliberate actions by the clinic. The thought that her body had been used without her knowledge or consent filled her with a mix of anger and violation. She spent sleepless nights replaying her visit to the clinic, the sterile examination rooms, and the assurances of the staff who had seemed so professional at the time. The folder, still open on her kitchen table, became a symbol of betrayal, its pages a reminder of how her trust had been exploited. Yet, alongside her outrage, a fierce determination took root. Journee realised that her case was not an isolated incident, but part of a larger pattern of misconduct. She resolved to uncover the full truth, no matter how unsettling, and to hold those responsible accountable for what they had done to her and potentially others. Armed with the investigators' damning findings, Journee steeled herself for another visit to the Omaha Reproductive Health Clinic. The weight of Marcus's report, detailing the clinic's unsanctioned experiments, fueled her determination to confront Dr. Paulson and demand the full truth. She drove to the clinic in the late afternoon, the spring sun casting long shadows across the city's streets. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her pulse quickening with each mile. The sleek building loomed ahead, its glass facade reflecting the fading light, a stark contrast to the dark secrets it harboured. Journee parked her car and took a moment to steady her breathing, clutching the folder of documents that now held the key to unravelling her nightmare. She walked into the lobby with purpose, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor as she approached the receptionist and demanded an immediate meeting with Dr. Paulson. The receptionist, sensing Journee's intensity, hesitated but eventually led her to the same office where she had met Paulson before. The room felt smaller this time, its walls lined with the same medical journals and certificates that now seemed like a facade of legitimacy. Dr. Paulson stood as she entered, his expression a mix of surprise and guarded professionalism. Journee wasted no time, placing the folder on his desk and declaring that she knew about the clinic's unauthorized experiments. She accused him of violating her trust and demanded a complete explanation of what had been done to her during the study. Her voice trembled with a mix of anger and fear, but she stood firm, her eyes locked on his, refusing to let him evade her questions as he had before. She threatened legal action, her words sharp and unwavering, warning that she would expose the clinic's misconduct to the authorities and the public if he didn't provide answers. Dr. Paulson's composure faltered under the weight of her accusations. He sat down heavily, his hands clasped tightly on the desk, and began to explain. He admitted that Journee's eggs had been used in an experimental artificial insemination procedure, but he insisted it was part of a groundbreaking scientific study aimed at advancing reproductive technology. He claimed the donor material was anonymous, sourced through strict protocols, and that her pregnancy was an unintended outcome of the trial. His assurances rang hollow, his words carefully chosen to deflect blame. Journee pressed harder, pointing out the inconsistencies in the consent form and the lack of transparency about the procedure's risks. As the confrontation intensified, Paulson's polished demeanour cracked. In a moment of frustration, he let slip that the donor material had come from someone within the clinic, a revelation that seemed to escape him before he could catch it. The room fell silent as Journee processed his words. The child she carried, the one she had struggled to comprehend, was genetically tied to someone in this very clinic. The realization sent a shiver through her mind racing with the implications. She stared at Paulson, searching his face for clues, and noticed a flicker of unease in his eyes. His insistence on monitoring her health until delivery, which he had framed as concern, now took on a sinister tone. Journee's suspicions settled on Paulson himself, his nervous gestures, his overly involved demeanour, and now this accidental admission pointed to a personal connection she hadn't dared to consider. She demanded to know who the donor was, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Paulson backtracked, claiming the donor's identity was confidential, but his hesitation only deepened her distrust. Journee's emotions churned as she stood in the office, the air thick with tension. She felt violated, her body and autonomy betrayed by the very professionals she had trusted. The thought that Paulson or someone close to him might be linked to her child filled her with a mix of horror and rage. She gathered her documents, refusing his offer of further medical care, and stormed out of the office. The lobby blurred past her as she made her way to her car, her heart pounding with a resolve to uncover the identity of the donor. The spring air felt colder now, the city around her indifferent to the storm brewing within. As she drove home, the weight of Paulson's slip echoed in her mind, a clue that promised to unravel the final pieces of the truth. Journee knew she couldn't stop now. She had to find out who was responsible, no matter how painful the answer might be. Marcus, the private investigator, intensified his efforts to uncover the truth behind the Omaha Reproductive Health Clinic's actions. He spent long hours sifting through encrypted files obtained from a former employee, cross-referencing patient records with procedural logs. His persistence paid off when he unearthed irrefutable evidence. The donor material used in Journee's procedure belonged to Dr. Paulson himself. The discovery revealed that Paulson had secretly used his own biological material in the experimental insemination, bypassing all ethical guidelines in a reckless bid for scientific acclaim. Marcus detailed his findings in a report, noting that Paulson had manipulated the clinic's protocols to conceal his involvement, ensuring his actions remained hidden from both colleagues and patients. The report, delivered to Journee in a plain manila envelope, confirmed her worst fears and ignited a firestorm of emotions within her. Journee sat at her kitchen table, the report spread out before her under the dim glow of a single lamp. The words on the pages blurred as her eyes welled with tears of anger, and the man who presented himself as a trusted professional had violated her in the most profound way, using her body as a tool for his own ambitions. The realization that the child she carried was genetically tied to Paulson filled her with a visceral sense of violation, yet the faint movements within her abdomen reminded her of the life she now harbored. She wrestled with conflicting emotions, torn between revulsion at the circumstances and an instinctive pull toward the innocent life she had not chosen to create. Determined to confront Paulson one final time, she resolved to face him in person, to demand answers and hold him accountable for his actions. The next day, Journee returned to the clinic, her steps heavy with purpose as she navigated the familiar lobby. The receptionist, recognizing her from previous visits, hesitated but allowed her to proceed to Paulson's office. The room, once a symbol of authority, now felt like a stage for betrayal. Paulson stood behind his desk, his face paling as Journee entered, clutching the investigator's report. "What?" She laid out the evidence, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within her, accusing him of abusing her trust and violating every ethical standard. She described the depth of his deception, from the manipulated consent forms to his use of his own biological material, each word a weight that seemed to press against him. Paulson's initial attempts at denial faltered under the weight of her accusations. He slumped into his chair, his hands trembling as he tried to justify his actions, claiming his experiment was a bold step toward advancing medical science. He argued that his intentions were noble, aimed at revolutionizing reproductive technology, but his words rang hollow, a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation. Journee rejected his excuses, her anger cutting through his rationalizations. She saw through his self-serving narrative, recognizing the arrogance and entitlement that had driven him to exploit her and others. The confrontation reached its peak when a sharp pain gripped her abdomen, sudden and intense, halting her mid-sentence. Her vision blurred as another wave of pain followed, stronger than before, and she realized she was going into labor. Paulson, momentarily stunned, called for assistance, and clinic staff rushed Journee to a nearby hospital. The drive was a haze, the pain overwhelming as paramedics monitored her condition. At Omaha General Hospital, the same facility where her ordeal had begun, Journee was wheeled into the maternity ward. The delivery room was a whirlwind of activity, with nurses and doctors moving swiftly to prepare for the birth. Despite the emotional and physical toll of the past weeks, Journee's body responded to the demands of labor, and after hours of intense effort, she gave birth to a healthy girl. As the nurses placed the newborn in her arms, Journee gazed at the tiny squirming bundle, her emotions a tangled knot. The child's delicate features and soft breath stirred an unexpected warmth within her, a flicker of connection that clashed with the horror of how she had come to be. The weight of Paulson's betrayal lingered, casting a shadow over the moment, but the reality of the child in her arms grounded her. She felt a surge of protectiveness, a resolve to shield this innocent life from the circumstances of its creation. Exhausted and emotionally drained, Journee lay in the hospital bed, the infant cradled against her, her mind wrestling with the duality of disgust for Paulson's actions and a burgeoning sense of attachment to the daughter she had not anticipated. A year had passed since the harrowing delivery in the Omaha hospital, and Journee had made the resolute decision to keep her daughter, whom she named Esperanza, a name that meant hope in Spanish, a quiet nod to the light she sought amidst the darkness of her ordeal. The early months of motherhood had been a whirlwind of adjustment as she navigated sleepless nights and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a newborn. Her small house, once a sanctuary of solitude, now echoed with the soft coos and cries of Esperanza, whose presence transformed the space into a home filled with new purpose. Journee's initial ambivalence had gradually given way to a fierce love for her daughter, whose wide eyes and curious gaze seemed to anchor her in moments of doubt. Yet the shadow of how Esperanza came to be lingered, fueling Journee's determination to seek justice. She had channeled her anger and sense of violation into action, filing a lawsuit against the Omaha Reproductive Health Clinic and Dr. Paulson. The legal battle that followed was grueling, drawing attention from local media and advocacy groups. Journee, with the support of her attorney, presented Marcus's investigative findings, exposing the clinic's unethical experiments and Paulson's misuse of his own biological material. The courtroom was a stark, imposing space, its wooden benches filled with reporters and curious onlookers as the case unfolded. The evidence was damning, and the public outcry grew louder with each revelation. The clinic, unable to withstand the scrutiny and financial strain, shuttered its doors permanently. Dr. Paulson, stripped of his medical license, faced professional ruin, his once sterling reputation reduced to a cautionary tale of hubris and betrayal. For Journee, the victory was bittersweet, a step toward accountability, but not a full erasure of the pain she had endured. The ordeal had reshaped Journee's perspective, igniting a passion to advocate for others who had suffered similar violations. She began attending support groups for victims of medical malpractice, sharing her story in community centres and online forums. Her soft-spoken demeanour and unwavering resolve drew others to her, and soon she was invited to speak at conferences on medical ethics. She stood before audiences, her hands steady despite the weight of her words, recounting how her trust had been exploited and urging reforms to protect patients' rights. Her advocacy work became a lifeline, a way to transform her trauma into something meaningful. She connected with women across Nebraska and beyond, offering guidance and resources to those navigating their own battles against institutional betrayal. The work was exhausting but fulfilling, a reminder that her voice could spark change. Tyree, her steadfast friend, remained by her side throughout the year. His support had been unwavering, from late-night phone calls during the lawsuit to helping her move into a new chapter of her life. Tyree, with his warm laugh and knack for knowing when to offer a quiet presence, became more than a friend. He was a partner in her mission. Together, they organised community workshops on patient rights, Tyree using his connections in the school system to spread awareness. Their collaboration deepened their bond, rooted in mutual respect and a shared commitment to justice. Journee found comfort in his reliability, a counterbalance to the chaos of the past year. Seeking a fresh start, Journee decided to leave Omaha behind. She relocated to the small town of Fremont, Nebraska, a quiet community with rolling fields and a tight-knit feel. She rented a modest house with a backyard where Esperanza could play, its white picket fence a symbol of the stability she craved. In Fremont, she took a job as a counselor at a local middle school, finding solace in guiding young students through their challenges. The work reminded her of her own resilience, and the children's openness gave her a renewed sense of purpose. Her days were filled with helping students navigate friendships and academic pressures, while her evenings were spent with Esperanza, reading picture books or watching her toddle across the living room. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low over Fremont's fields, Journee sat on a blanket in her backyard, watching Esperanza chase a butterfly through the grass. The toddler's laughter filled the air, a sound that stirred a quiet joy in Journee's heart. She reflected on the pain of the past, the violation that had upended her life, and the strength she had found in its aftermath. Esperanza, with her boundless curiosity and fearless spirit, had become an unexpected source of healing. Journee understood that the scars of her experience would never fully fade, but her daughter's presence gave her a reason to move forward. In the soft light of the setting sun, she saw not just the weight of her past, but the promise of a future defined by love and resilience.